The pen was already moving when Helena Waverly crossed the drawing room. She had watched it happen from the doorway. The way Julian Blackwood, Duke of Ashbourne, lifted the quill with the particular ease of a man who had signed 100 documents and found no reason to pause over 101. The marriage contract lay open on the mahogany table, its pages weighted flat by a silver inkwell and a small brass seal she recognized from her father's desk. Cressida stood at the far window adjusting her gloves, a bride performing the ceremony of readiness, smoothing pale kid leather over knuckles that had never known work. Lady Judith Waverly stood beside the solicitor, Mr. Fisk, with her hands folded and her face composed into the expression of a woman watching a transaction she had managed for years arrive, at last, at its conclusion. Helena had seen that face across dinner tables and at the head of staircases and in the cold gray light of a January morning when she was 16 years old. And Judith had told her she was nothing. 3 years she had waited in this house. 3 years of 5 o'clock mornings and the cold drag of the bell pull and the smell of starch in a uniform that had never been hers. 3 years of carrying correspondence through that door, of serving breakfast at that table, of standing at the edge of every room Julian Blackwood occupied and watching him not see her. She had chosen Ashbourne deliberately. Her father had told her at 14, "If anything happens to me, the contract is at Ashbourne, second shelf, eastern cabinet, behind the land surveys. Your name is in the last clause." And when Judith had stripped her name away at 16 and left her with nothing but the clothes on her back and the memory of a dead man's instructions, she had made herself into Ellen Marsh and walked through the servants' entrance and begun to wait. Last night she had opened the eastern cabinet. The original betrothal contract was exactly where her father said it would be. She had read it by candlelight, with her hand steady and her breathing measured, and something cold and certain settling into her chest like river water, finding its level. The eldest legitimate daughter of the Earl of Marston. Her name. Her father's seal. This morning she had read the marriage contract on the table. The last clause referenced the parish record of St. Michael's, Marston, confirming the legitimacy of the bride. She had been staring at that parish record for 4 minutes from the doorway. The rector's hand had been small, precise, left-leaning. She knew it from childhood. From the baptismal register she had pored over at 8 years old, when her father showed her her own entry. From the Christmas notices pinned at the church door. From the careful, cramped script of Rector Pemberton's annual letter to her father. The record on this table was written in a rounder hand. Looser. The letters sat differently on the line. She crossed the room. Her shoes made no sound on the carpet. She bent to Julian Blackwood's ear, and she spoke. "Don't sign it, Your Grace. The parish record is forged. The last clause depends on it." Julian's hand stopped. He was very still for a moment. The stillness of a man whose body had registered something before his mind had caught up to it. He read the last line. He looked at the parish record attached to the contract. He looked at the woman beside him. Gray dress, white apron, hair pinned under a linen cap. A housemaid. "How would you know what the rector's handwriting looks like?" he asked. "Because I was christened in that church," Helena said, "and that is not Rector Pemberton's hand." At the window, Cressida looked up. She looked at her mother. Judith's face was marble, perfectly controlled, giving nothing. But Cressida had grown up reading that face, and she read it now, and she rose from the window seat and walked out of the drawing room without a word, the door closing softly behind her. The room was very quiet. Julian set down the pen. He turned in his chair and looked at the woman standing beside him with the attention of a man who had not truly looked, at a housemaid in his own employment for 3 years, and was now looking and finding the experience unexpectedly disorienting. "Who are you?" he asked. Helena straightened. She had rehearsed this moment in the linen room at midnight, and in the corridor at dawn, and in the still hours between one task and the next, when she had nothing but time and the silence of a house that did not know her name. She had rehearsed it until the words were as familiar as breathing. "My name is Helena Waverly," she said. "I am the eldest legitimate daughter of Edward Waverly, Earl of Marston. I am the woman you were contracted to marry." From the corridor doorway, Mrs. Fenton, the housekeeper, stood without moving. She had come to supervise the refreshments for the signing. She had heard every word. She looked at the woman in the gray dress and the white apron, and then she withdrew, without comment, and her footsteps made no sound going away. Mr. Fisk cleared his throat. Judith said nothing at all. Julian looked at Helena Waverly, this woman who had carried his correspondence and poured his tea and stood at the edge of his drawing room for 3 years, and said quietly, "Come with me." He took her to his study and closed the door. "Proof," he said without sitting. "Whatever you are claiming, I need proof." "I have none I can show you at this moment," Helena said. She did not apologize for it. She stood in the center of the room in her housemaid's dress with her hands at her sides and met his eyes without flinching. "If I show you the document I found in the Eastern cabinet last night, it will be in Judith's hands by this afternoon and destroyed before morning. So I am not going to show it to you. What I am going to give you is 3 facts you can verify yourself today without my help." Julian looked at her steadily. "Go on." "Ask Reverend Holt about Rector Pemberton's handwriting. Holt has maintained every entry in the St. Michael's Register since 1790. He knew his predecessor's hand. Show him the record attached to that contract and watch his face." "That is one." "Ask Mrs. Fenton why a housemaid reads Latin. I was polishing the silver in the east parlor 6 weeks ago, and she came in, and I was reading the inscription on the back of the Pemberton plate. The dedication is in Latin, and I translated it aloud without thinking. She has not mentioned it since, but she has thought about it." Julian was quiet. "Ask your archivist whether anyone accessed the Eastern cabinet last night," Helena said. "He locks it at 8 o'clock. I was in there at 10:30. He will have noticed the lock was tampered with this morning." "You broke into my archive. I retrieved a document that belongs to me." "You don't know that it belongs to you," Julian said. "Not until it's verified." "I know what my father's seal looks like," Helena said. "I know what my own name looks like in a contract. I know what Rector Pemberton's handwriting looks like. I have known all 3 of these things since I was 15 years old, and I have been 12 feet from your desk for 3 years, waiting for the right moment to use them." He did not dismiss her. That was the thing she had not entirely planned for, the possibility that he would simply listen. She had prepared for anger, for disbelief, for the particular cold courtesy of a man who did not want to hear what a servant was telling him. She had not prepared for Julian Blackwood to sit down in his chair and look at the floor for a long moment, and then look back at her with an expression she could not quite read. 3 years, he said. She answered simply, "Yes." "Serving in this house?" "Yes." He looked at her hands. She was aware of what he saw, the roughness at the knuckle, the faint red mark along her right palm from the copper pots, the short nails of a woman who worked. She did not move to conceal them. "I will ask the 3 questions," he said finally. She nodded and left. The servants' corridor was empty at that hour. most of the household still absorbed in the quiet confusion that had followed Cressida's departure from the drawing room. Helena walked toward the linen room with her head down and her pace measured. And she was almost at the door when Mrs. Fenton appeared at the far end of the passage. The housekeeper walked toward her without hurry and stopped 3 feet away. She was a compact woman in her 50s with gray at her temples and the particular authority of someone who had managed a large household for a very long time without raising her voice. "Ellen," Mrs. Fenton said. Then she stopped and corrected herself. "Or not Ellen, I think." "Not Ellen," Helena said. Mrs. Fenton was quiet for a moment. "I knew no housemaid quotes Virgil when she polishes silver. I said nothing because I did not know what you were running toward, whether you were in danger, whether you were hiding from something worse than this house. I did not want to make your situation harder by asking questions you could not safely answer." Helena had been composed for 3 years. She had been composed in the drawing room and in Julian's study and in the long, empty hours between. The composure had been a tool, something she picked up every morning with a uniform and set down at night. And she had trusted it completely. Mrs. Fenton's voice saying those words did something to it that she had not expected. She did not weep. But there was a moment, brief, specific, the length of a single breath held and then released, where the 3 years of it pressed against the back of her throat, and she had to look at the linen room door and wait for it to pass. "You are the Marston girl," Mrs. Fenton said. Not a question. "Yes," Helena said when she could. "Then you are braver than every woman in silk I have ever served." Mrs. Fenton looked at her steadily. "What do you need from me?" Helena recovered herself. "Nothing yet. When the time comes, I will ask." Mrs. Fenton nodded once and walked away, and Helena opened the linen room door and stood for a moment in the smell of pressed cotton and lavender, and breathed. Lady Judith Waverly arrived at Ashbourne the following morning, 2 days ahead of the schedule she had communicated to the house. She came in her own carriage with her own maid and a trunk of correspondence, and she moved through the house with the authority of a woman who had managed far more complicated situations than this one, and expected to manage it again. Helena was carrying a tray through the east corridor when she heard the carriage on the gravel. She did not stop. She had known Judith would come. She had factored it into the plan from the beginning, the arrival of the woman who had forged the record and declared her illegitimate and put her in service in her own fiancé's house. She had imagined, in the linen room at night, how she would feel when she saw that face again. She had thought she would feel cold. She had thought she would feel nothing at all. She was in the east corridor with the breakfast tray when Judith came around the corner from the main staircase. Judith stopped. She looked at the housemaid in the gray dress. She looked at her face. Something passed across Judith's expression. Not guilt, not fear, but the specific sharpening of a woman who has encountered a problem she thought she had disposed of and is now rapidly calculating the new dimensions of it. Then the expression closed, and Judith was simply a countess looking at a servant, and she walked past without speaking. Helena kept walking. She did not see Julian until she reached the far end of the corridor. He appeared from the morning room doorway. She did not know if he had been there already or if he had heard the carriage. And he looked at her for a single second, and then he turned toward Judith. "Lady Waverly," he said, "you are early. Allow me to show you to the morning room. Mrs. Fenton has prepared tea." He stepped into the corridor between them, his back to Helena, his voice perfectly easy, and he steered Judith toward the morning room door with the unhurried authority of a man in his own house. Helena walked past behind them. She did not look back, but she watched his shoulders from the far end of the corridor. Squared, deliberate, carrying the weight of what he was doing without making it visible. And she noted it and filed it away with the other things she had learned about Julian Blackwood in 3 years of watching him from the edges of rooms. That evening, Judith found Cressida privately in her bedroom and spoke for 12 minutes. Helena, passing in the corridor with the evening correspondence, heard enough. The housemaid, your father's other daughter. She has no proof and no name. Ignore her. I will manage the legal position from London. Cressida said nothing in reply. Through the door, Helena heard only silence, and then the quiet sound of a chair being pushed back. The house party assembled 4 days later for the Ashbourne midsummer preparations. 12 guests, 3 days of dinners and riding, and the particular social machinery of an English country house in June. Reverend Holt of St. Matthew's, Ashbourne, a lean, careful man of 60 with ink-stained fingers and the habit of examining things closely before he spoke, was among them. Helena had waited for this. The estate chapel was small and cool, its walls whitewashed, its windows letting in a low gray morning light. Judith had placed the framed parish record from St. Michael's in the chapel vestry 2 weeks earlier as part of the wedding preparations, confirmation of the bride's legitimacy, displayed where guests might see it. Helena had looked at it every morning when she brought the chapel flowers. She arranged with the particular, invisible efficiency of a housemaid who had learned to move events without appearing to direct them, for Reverend Holt to be standing in the vestry at 11 o'clock on the second morning of the house party, along with 5 other guests who had drifted in from the garden to escape a brief shower. She stood at the back of the chapel in her uniform and said nothing. Holt looked at the framed record because one of the guests, a Mrs. Alderton who had a fondness for parish history, mentioned it to him. He moved closer. He put on his spectacles. He was quiet for longer than the occasion seemed to require. "This is not my predecessor's hand," he said at last. The room went still. "I have maintained every entry in the St. Michael's register since 1790. Holt continued, his voice careful and precise. "I know Rector Pemberton's script as well as I know my own. This entry has been replaced. The paper is different. The hand is different. The ink color is different." Judith was standing at the edge of the group. She had come in from the garden 2 minutes earlier, and Helena had watched her see Holt at the frame and make the calculation too late. "Variations in a curate's handwriting are common," Judith said, her voice entirely steady. "The entry was filed by a junior clerk during one of Rector Pemberton's illnesses. The diocese confirmed the record." "I am not speaking of variation," Holt said. He was not a man who raised his voice. He did not raise it now. "I am speaking of a different hand entirely, different letter forms, different pressure on the quill. This is not a variation. This page has been replaced." The 6 guests in the chapel were very quiet. Mrs. Alderton looked at the record, then at Judith, then at the record again. A gentleman near the door cleared his throat. The forgery was confirmed, in front of witnesses, in the clear gray light of the Ashbourne chapel. But Helena's identity remained unproven, and she knew it. The question had shifted. She could see it in the faces turning to look at each other, in the particular hesitation of people who had heard something they did not yet know what to do with. The question was no longer whether Cressida was legitimate. The question was who the eldest daughter actually was. Helena stood at the back of the chapel in her gray dress and white apron and did not speak. Her time had not yet come. Julian came to her that night. He found her in the servants' corridor outside the linen room and told her to come to the study and she followed him through the back passages and up the narrow stair and into the room that smelled of beeswax and old paper and the particular quiet of a space where a man spent his evenings alone. He had a journal on the desk, leather-bound, the spine cracked with age, the pages dense with a slanted hand she did not recognize. "My father's," Julian said. He did not sit. He stood beside the desk with his hand on the cover and looked at her. "I found it 2 years ago in the locked drawer of the writing table. He left no instructions about it. I think he expected it to stay locked." He opened it to a marked page and stepped back. Helena came forward and read. "The Marston record is false. I have examined it against the original in the diocesan archive. Helena Waverly is legitimate, the eldest daughter, the contracted bride, precisely as the agreement states. I confronted Lady Judith Waverly on the 14th. She has made clear that she possesses information regarding a child born to a tenant's wife at Ashbourne 30 years ago, and that she will use it if I pursue the matter. I have chosen silence. God forgive me. The girl is 16 and has been put from her home, and I have chosen my reputation over her life, and I do not know how to live with that, and I am going to have to learn." Helena stood with the journal in her hands and read the page twice. She set it on the desk. "Your father knew," she said, "for 6 months before he died. He chose his reputation over my life." "Yes," Julian said. He did not try to qualify it or explain it away. Helena was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, "How long have you known?" 2 years. Since I found the journal." Julian moved to the window. Outside, the grounds were dark, the last of the evening light gone. "I began searching for you immediately, through solicitors, through parish inquiries in Marston and the surrounding counties. I wrote to 3 separate record offices. I found nothing, no trace of Helena Waverly after the declaration of illegitimacy. She had simply vanished." He turned from the window. "You were here," he said. "You have been here every morning." 12 feet from your desk," Helena said. Something moved across his face. Not anger at her, but at himself, sharp and specific. The expression of a man confronting the architecture of his own blindness. "I cannot undo that." "No," Helena said, "but you can't stop searching. I am standing in front of you." She turned to leave. At the door, she stopped. She had not planned this, or perhaps she had. Perhaps 3 years of watching him had produced this knowledge of him the way water produces a channel, without intention and without stopping. She turned back. She crossed to where he stood beside the desk, and she took his right hand, the hand that had been moving toward the pen that morning, and she turned it palm up. She looked at it the way she had looked at silver for tarnish, with the same professional attention, the same care. "You have ink on your thumb," she said. "I was writing to the diocesan archivist this evening." "For me?" His voice was quiet. "Yes." She folded his fingers closed. She held the closed fist between both her hands for 3 seconds. The warmth of it against her palms, the weight of what it had taken to get to this room, and this moment pressing against her from all directions at once. Then she released his hand and left. Behind her, she heard him open it. Judith moved the following morning. She wrote to the solicitor Fisk, instructing him to dismiss the disruptive housemaid, the one who had been making claims in the drawing room and apparently agitating the household staff. Ellen Marsh, the letter said. Upper housemaid. 3 years' service. Dismissed without reference. Julian found Helena in the linen room at noon with her small collection of objects laid out on the narrow bed. A book, a letter, a child's embroidered handkerchief with initials in the corner, a pressed flower, that had been her mother's. "You expected this," he said. The moment Holt spoke in the chapel, I lost my position and my access to the archive, Helena said. She was folding the handkerchief with care. I had prepared for it. "The betrothal contract," he said. "Is it safe?" "It is not here. It is hidden, and it will stay hidden until the right moment." "And when is the right moment?" Helena looked up at him. "The midsummer ball is in 4 days. Judith will be in that room. There will be 60 guests, county families, the magistrate, 2 members of the clergy. I need Judith present, and I need witnesses who cannot be quietly managed afterward. A servant's testimony in a solicitor's office disappears. A servant's testimony before 60 people at a duke's midsummer ball does not." Julian was quiet. "Do you trust me?" Helena asked. The question landed in the room and stayed there. He was a duke being asked to trust a woman who had been in his household under a false name for 3 years. A woman he had failed to see, a woman who had broken into his archive. A woman who was asking him to wait 4 more days while she managed a strategy she had been building since she was 16 years old. He answered without hesitation, "Yes." "Then wait," Helena said. 4 days. That afternoon they walked the Marston-Ashbourne boundary line together. Julian had suggested it, and Helena had not refused. And they went out through the south gate in the low afternoon light, the June grass long and pale gold along the field edges. The boundary was the original source of the marriage alliance, the disputed fence line between the 2 estates that neither family had been able to resolve for 30 years. Helena had known it was coming to Ashbourne as part of her dowry before she knew what a dowry was. She named every post and marker from memory as they walked. "That oak is the northeast corner," she said, pointing without slowing. "The boundary runs south from there to the old stone wall. The wall is Ashbourne's. The land on the east side of it is Marston's. My father disputed the eastern field for 20 years. He was right. The original survey from 1743 puts the field inside the Marston boundary. Ashbourne's steward remeasured in 1801 and moved the post. My father marked the original position with a notch in the oak." Julian looked at the oak. The notch was there. "My father walked this with me when I was 15, Helena said. "He told me, this is where Ashbourne ends and Marston begins. He said one day it would matter. I did not know then that it would matter in quite this way." She stopped at the old fence post at the boundary's midpoint, the marker that had stood since before either of their father's time. The wood bleached gray by weather, the iron hinge rusted to the color of dried blood. "In 4 days," she said. "I will either have my name back or I will have nothing. No position, no income, no identity I can prove to any court in England. I have spent 3 years building toward one public moment, and if it does not hold, there is no second attempt." Julian stood beside her. He did not offer false comfort. He did not tell her it would work, because he could not know that. "I believe you," he said instead. "I want you to know that separately from whatever happens in that ballroom. I have read my father's journal. I have seen Holt's face in the chapel. I have watched you describe this land with more precision than my own steward. Whatever a room full of county families decides on Friday night, I believe you." Helena turned to face him. She was tired, the specific tiredness of a person who has been holding something heavy for a very long time and can feel the moment approaching when she will either set it down or drop it. She placed her forehead against his chest, not an embrace, simply the weight of 3 years finding somewhere to rest. He lifted one hand and placed it on the back of her head. He held it there, steady and without demand. They stood at the border between the 2 estates, while the last of the evening light drained from the sky over Marston, and neither of them spoke. And the silence between them was full rather than empty. Julian rode to the diocesan archive the following morning and returned before noon. He came to the study and laid 2 documents on the desk side by side. Helena came to look. The original christening entry from St. Michael's, Marston. Rector Pemberton's hand, small, precise, left-leaning. The letters pressed firmly into the page, with the particular consistency of a man who had written the same style for 40 years. And beside it, the entry from the framed record in the chapel. Rounder, looser, the letters sitting differently on the line, the ink a slightly different shade. The difference was visible to anyone who looked without deciding first what they wanted to see. The archivist confirmed it, Julian said. The original entry has been in the diocesan record since 1801. It has never been removed, never been copied, never been amended. The name in it is Helena Margaret Waverly, first child of Edward Waverly, Earl of Marston, and his wife Catherine, born the 12th of March, 1801. Helena looked at her own christening entry. Her name in Rector Pemberton's careful hand, exactly as her father had shown her when she was 8 years old, and she had traced the letters with her finger, and he had said, "That is you, that is your name. It will always be there." Judith also wrote to the bishop, Julian said. She claimed Holt was elderly and confused, and that the record was genuine. I intercepted the letter before it left the house. Helena looked up at him. "Fisk brought it to me," Julian said. "He is a solicitor, and he knows the difference between a client and an accessory." The night before the ball was warm and still, the air carrying the smell of cut grass and something sweet from the south garden. Helena was at the fence post at dusk when Julian found her. He came on foot across the field, and she heard him before she saw him. And she did not move. "Tomorrow," she said, when he was close enough to hear. He came to stand beside her. "Tomorrow." "I need you to stand first," she said. "Before I step forward. The room needs to hear it from you before they hear it from me. A woman in a maid's uniform speaking her own name is a curiosity. A duke presenting documentary evidence is a different thing entirely." "I know," Julian said. "I have thought about the order. If Judith speaks before the evidence is fully presented, she will redirect the room. She is very good at redirecting rooms." "Then I will not give her the opportunity." He looked at her in the fading light. "Helena." It was the first time he had used her name. Not Ellen, not Miss Waverly, not Lady Helena, not the careful neutrality of a duke addressing a housemaid. Simply her name, spoken as if he had been holding it in his mouth for 2 years and had finally found the moment to say it. She did not answer him, but her chin lifted slightly, the way it did when something landed precisely where it was aimed. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said, "I want you to know that I wrote to my solicitor this morning. Not Fisk, my own man in London. I have instructed him that regardless of the outcome of the ball, regardless of whether the room accepts the evidence, I am withdrawing from the engagement to Cressida. The match as it stands is void. That is done." Helena was very still. "You lose the boundary resolution. You lose the political settlement. Your steward has been managing the Eastern Field dispute for 30 years. "I know what I lose," Julian said. She looked at him. Outside the warmth of his deliberate voice, the evening was very quiet. The last bird settling, the grass still, the border between Ashbourne and Marston running through the dark beneath their feet. She did not tell him what that cost him. She did not perform gratitude. She simply looked at him, and he looked at her. and the fence post stood between the two estates as it had stood for a century. And neither of them moved till the dark was complete. The midsummer ball. 60 guests in the Ashbourne ballroom, the county magistrate and his wife, 3 families from the Marston Valley, 2 members of the clergy, Mrs. Alderton, who had been in the chapel when Holt spoke, a dozen others who had heard the whisper moving through the house party for 3 days. Cressida in blue silk at the edge of the room. Judith beside the long windows in gray, her posture immaculate, her expression the marble composure that Helena had known since she was 10 years old. Helena stood at the back of the room in her uniform. She had dressed for it deliberately. Not because she had nothing else. She had retrieved her own dress from the trunk in the attic room where Judith had had it sent 3 years ago. She had held it in her hands that morning. The cream muslin, the small mother-of-pearl buttons. She'd put it back. She wanted them to see who spoke. Not a lady in borrowed costume, the woman who had served their tea. Julian stood at the front of the room. He did not call for silence. The room quieted when he moved to the table. The way rooms quiet when a man with that particular quality of stillness begins to do something with intention. 3 years ago, he said, Lady Judith Waverly presented a parish record to this household and to the Ashbourne solicitors declaring her stepdaughter Helena Waverly illegitimate. That record was used to void Helena Waverly's betrothal contract and to substitute Cressida Waverly as the prospective bride. I accepted the record at the time because I had no reason not to. He placed the 2 documents on the table, side by side. Reverend Holt of St. Matthew's, Ashbourne, examined the parish record in the estate chapel 4 days ago, in the presence of 6 witnesses. He stated that the entry was not his predecessor's handwriting, that the page had been replaced, and that the original entry remains in the diocesan archive. He set his hand on the right-hand document. I retrieved the original yesterday. It is in Rector Pemberton's hand. It names Helena Margaret Waverly as the eldest legitimate daughter of Edward Waverly, Earl of Marston. The diocesan archivist confirmed that this entry has never been removed, amended, or duplicated. The room was entirely still. Judith stepped forward. "This is a servant's fantasy," she said. Her voice was perfectly controlled. "The housemaid has been making claims in this house for days, claims that any court would—" "She is not making claims," Julian said. "I am." He looked at Judith for a moment with an expression that was not anger and was not contempt, but was something quieter and more final than either. Then he turned to the room. The original betrothal contract between the Ashbourne and Marston estates specifies the eldest legitimate daughter of the Earl of Marston. I have been engaged to the wrong woman for 3 years, and I have been searching for the right one for 2, and I did not find her because she was in this house. She has been in this house. She entered my service 3 years ago under a false name because her stepmother had her declared illegitimate, and she had no other means of accessing the document that would prove her identity. She chose Ashbourne because her father told her the betrothal contract was here. She spent 3 years as a housemaid in her own fiancé's household, serving at his table and waiting for the moment the evidence could speak louder than her station. He turned toward the back of the room. Helena stepped forward. She walked from the back of the ballroom to the table in 60 guests' worth of silence, in her gray dress and white apron, her hair pinned under its cap, her servant's shoes making no sound on the ballroom floor. She stood beside the table, and she looked at the room. "My name is Helena Waverly," she said. "I am the eldest legitimate daughter of Edward Waverly, Earl of Marston. I have been in this house for 3 years. I have served breakfast in this room. I have carried correspondence through that door. I have poured tea at this table, and I have said nothing. Because a servant's word against a countess is no word at all. And I knew it, And so I waited. I waited until the evidence could speak without me. She reached into the pocket of her apron and placed the betrothal contract on the table beside the two Parish records, the original document from the Eastern Cabinet, her father's seal in dark red wax, the Ashbourne crest beside it, and in the last clause, in her father's hand, the name of the eldest legitimate daughter of the Earl of Marston. Her name. Judith's voice came from the side of the room. She has been a maid for 3 years, a maid in this house, living under a false name. She has been a maid because you made her one, Julian said. He turned to face Judith fully. You forged a Parish record to strip her of her inheritance and her marriage. She was 16 years old. She had no solicitor who would take the case of a declared bastard against a countess. She entered my service because it was the only way she could reach this document, and she found it. And she waited 3 years, and I did not see her for a single day of those 3 years. That failure is mine. I am naming it publicly because it is mine to name. Cressida had not moved from her place near the wall. She stood in her blue silk with her hands at her sides and her face very white, and she was looking at the contract on the table. You told me she was a bastard, she said. Her voice came out unevenly, as if she had not intended to speak and could not stop. She was looking at Judith. You told me the match was mine by right. You told me the record was filed by a clerk and the diocese had confirmed it, and there was nothing to question. Cressida, Judith said, the rector says the record is forged. Cressida's voice was shaking now. The Duke says the record is forged. The archivist confirmed it. The contract says Helena. She looked at the document on the table. Not me. It says Helena. She turned to look at Helena directly. The first time she had looked at her, really looked at her in 3 years of living in the same house. I did not know. I want you to know that I did not know. The room was silent. I believe you, Helena said. Cressida walked out, not following Judith's instructions, following her own feet, going wherever they would take her away from this room and this table, and the name written in her father's hand that was not hers. The door opened and closed, and she was gone. Judith stood alone. The room did not move toward her. No one spoke to her. No one offered her an arm. No one provided the social machinery of assistance that a countess might expect in a difficult moment. Julian did not address her again. He did not need to. He let the silence do what silence does to a person who has spent 30 years filling it with constructed authority. And after a long moment, Judith walked out. The door closed. Helena stood at the table with the 3 documents in front of her and 60 people watching her in the drawing room full of evening light. She was in the corridor outside the ballroom when Julian found her. She was leaning against the wall with her eyes closed and her hands flat against the plaster behind her. The noise from inside the ballroom. Voices beginning to move again, the careful social reassembly of a room that has witnessed something it needs to process, was muffled through the door. You did not change, Julian said. I wanted them to see who spoke. Helena opened her eyes. Not a lady recovering her costume. The woman who served their tea and then told them who she was. Julian stopped in front of her. He looked at her, this woman in her gray dress and white apron, her hair pinned under its cap, the betrothal contract that had been in her pocket for 3 years now on the table inside, her name on a document that 60 people had read. He took her face in both his hands. Helena Waverly, he said, her full name. Slowly, the way a man says a word he has been searching for, he kissed her. Not the tentative press of a man uncertain of his welcome, but the deliberate certainty of someone who had spent 2 years searching and found what he was looking for 12 feet from his own desk and knew it. and was not going to pretend otherwise. When they stepped apart, Helena laughed. It came out of her before she could manage it, genuine, surprised, the first laugh in 3 years. And it was not elegant, and it was not composed, and she did not care. "You taste like silver polish and courage," Julian said. She laughed again. "That is the worst compliment anyone has ever given me. I will improve. Give me time." "You have had 3 years," she said. "I intend to use the next 3 considerably better." 1 week later, Helena walked the servants' corridor a final time. Not in uniform. She wore her own dress, the cream muslin with the mother-of-pearl buttons, retrieved from the attic trunk and pressed by Mrs. Fenton, who had done it herself and left it on the linen room door without comment. It fit the same as it had at 18. Some things did not change. She walked the length of the corridor slowly, past the copper pans and the linen shelves and the narrow window that looked onto the kitchen garden. She had walked this passage 5,000 times in 3 years. She knew every board that creaked, every hook that had lost its screw, every smell. Lye soap and coal dust, and the specific cold damp of stone in winter. She stopped at the linen room, the narrow bed with its gray blanket, the small shelf with the 1 candle, the pressed uniform still hanging on its hook, the white apron folded over the gray dress, the linen cap sitting on top of it. She had worn that uniform every day for 3 years. She had picked it up every morning at 5 o'clock and put it on in the dark and become Ellen Marsh for another day. She reached up and took the servant's bell pull from its hook on the wall. She was standing there with it in her hands when Julian appeared in the doorway. "You are keeping that," he said. "I earned this," Helena said. 3 years of silence, 5 o'clock mornings, and no name. I will hang it somewhere I can see it, so I never forget what it costs to be invisible. Julian looked at the bell pull in her hands, and then at her face, and then at the room that had been her world for 3 years. The narrow bed, the single window, the pressed uniform on its hook. "What room do you want?" he asked. "The one with the window facing Marston," Helena said. "I want to see my father's land from my own house." Julian said nothing for a moment. Then, "Mrs. Fenton has already had it aired." Helena looked at him. "She knew before I did," he said. "She has known for some time." Helena folded the bell pull over her arm and walked out of the linen room without looking back. Behind her, the narrow bed and the gray uniform and the 3 years of it stayed in the room where they belonged. Autumn came to Ashbourne with the particular clarity of an English October. The light lower and more golden, the trees along the south drive turning, the mornings carrying a chill that made the drawing-room fire necessary. The Ashbourne drawing-room, the same table. Helena sat at it with the estate correspondence spread before her, Ashbourne on the left, Marston on the right. The quarterly accounts for both properties laid out in the orderly columns she had developed over the summer. She wrote quickly, with the left-leaning hand that was her own, not Pemberton's, not anyone else's. Julian came in from the hall and stopped in the doorway. "The boundary dispute," he said. "Resolved," Helena said without looking up. "I drew the new line myself. The eastern field goes back to Marston, as the 1743 survey specified. The fence post moves 18 feet west. I have written to both stewards." Julian came to the table and looked at the correspondence over her shoulder. "You are better at this than I am." "I have always been better at this than you," Helena said. "You simply could not see me over the silver teapot." He sat beside her. He reached across and took her hand, the right hand, the one that had poured his tea and carried his letters, and held a pen against a forged record in the Ashbourne chapel. and placed a betrothal contract on a ballroom table before 60 witnesses. He held it without speaking, the way you hold something you know the full weight of. The new marriage settlement lay at the far end of the table, not the contract that had been laid out for signing in this room in June, not that document which had been drawn up by Fisk on Judith's instructions and named the wrong woman and served the wrong purpose. This one had been drafted by Julian's solicitor in London, reviewed by Helena herself, amended in 3 places where the terms did not satisfy her, and returned for revision. The boundary resolution was in it. The Marston estate management was in it. Her name was in it, in her own terms, in her own hand in the margin where she had written her amendments. She took the pen. Julian's hand rested on hers, not guiding it, not steadying it, simply resting the way a hand rests when it is found where it belongs. Helena Waverly signed the contract herself. Her name in full, in the left-leaning hand that Rector Pemberton had recorded in a christening entry in 1801, and that Judith had spent 3 years trying to erase. The ink dried in the autumn light. The drawing room was full. The table where the trap had been set was the table where she wrote her own name. Outside the window facing Marston, the October light lay across her father's fields, and the fence posts stood where they had always stood, and the land ran along its true boundary, and the name on the document was hers.